The first time my new roommate spoke more than 10 words to me, it was across a bowl of cooling fish stew, and what he said was, "I have a strange favour to ask, and you're allowed to say no." Then he set down his spoon, folded his hands like a man about to confess something to a priest, and asked me to help him do the one thing he had not been able to do alone for 2 years. I didn't answer right away. I sat there with the steam still rising between us and the harbour going dark in the window behind his head, and I felt the floor of my own carefully arranged life tilt about 3 degrees to the left. Because the favour he was about to ask me was, in its own quiet way, the exact thing I had been planning to do to myself the week he answered my ad. He had no idea. I didn't tell him for almost a year. Before I tell you what he asked and why I said yes, you need to understand the woman who was sitting on the other side of that table. Otherwise, none of it will land the way it landed for me. My name is Wren Aldous. I'm 34 years old, and I make pottery for a living in a town called Sableport, a cold little harbour on the coast of Maine where the fog comes in like it's paying rent. I throw bowls and mugs and the kind of heavy stoneware plates that survive being dropped, and I fire them in a gas kiln behind my house that costs more to run each month than I like to admit. I'm good at it. I'm not famous at it. There's a difference, and I made peace with that difference a long time ago, which is more than I can say for some of the other things in my life. I learnt to work with my hands from my father, who repaired wooden lobster boats until his back gave out. He used to say that clay and wood teach you the same lesson from opposite directions. Wood already has a shape, and you have to listen for it. Clay has no shape, and you have to give it one without forcing it, because clay remembers being forced. Push too hard at the wheel, and the whole thing wobbles and collapses, and you start over. I have started over more times than I can count. I'm getting ahead of myself. I had a brother. His name was Sam, and he was 3 years younger than me, and he was the loud one, the one who filled a room, the one our mother called the weather because you always knew when he'd arrived. Sam drowned off the breakwater on a clear October afternoon 2.5 years before any of this. There was no storm, there was no drama. He slipped on wet rock, helping a kid retrieve a fishing net, hit his head, and the water did the rest. The town called it a tragedy and a hero's death, and both of those things were true, and neither of them helped me at all. I did not scream when they told me. That's the thing people remember about me from that time. I didn't shout, I didn't collapse, I didn't make a sound. I went home and I glazed 40 mugs that were already glazed. My fiancé at the time, a man named Marcus, who sold commercial real estate and had a laugh you could hear across a parking lot, watched me do it and didn't understand. He kept waiting for me to break so he could be the one to hold the pieces. When I didn't break in, a way he could see, he decided I was broken in a way he couldn't fix. And 8 months after the funeral, he packed his car and told me I'd gone somewhere he couldn't follow. He wasn't wrong. I just didn't tell him I'd gone there on purpose, because it was the only place quiet enough to survive in. So that's who I was. A woman who made beautiful things and let her own life crack and never patched it. I posted the spare room because the kiln bills were eating me alive, and the bank had started sending the kind of envelopes you don't open at the kitchen table. That's what I told everyone. That was the practical reason, and it was real. The reason I didn't tell anyone was that I had quietly decided, in a flat, unemotional way that frightens me now to remember, that I was going to sell the studio, give the kiln to the high school art teacher, drive to my aunt's empty cabin in the North Woods, and simply stop. Not dramatically, not in one terrible night. Just stop being someone with a future. I had a date in my head. I had even started giving things away. Renting the room was meant to be a bridge to cover the last of the bills before I closed the whole thing down. I want to be honest about how far gone I was, because otherwise you won't understand what the man in the spare room actually did. 11 people answered the ad. 10 of them asked about the price first. One of them sent a message that said only this: I work with my hands and keep odd hours and I'm quiet. I won't be in your way. I'm told the kiln out back is gas-fired. Does it share a flue with the house chimney? Because if so, it'll need a damper check before winter. No haggling. No life story. Just a man who'd looked at the photo of my house and seen the one thing that might actually be dangerous. I wrote back the same night. His name was Theo Brandt, 38. He'd bought the failing boatyard at the south end of the harbour, the one everybody assumed would become condos, and he was bringing it back the slow way, one wooden hull at a time. He moved in with a duffel bag, a wooden tool chest he'd built himself, and a single cardboard box that he carried up the stairs like it was full of eggs and set on the floor of his room and did not unpack. I noticed the box. I noticed everything. It was a habit I'd picked up after Sam, this constant low-grade cataloguing of the world, as if paying close enough attention might keep the next bad thing from sneaking up on me. It never did, but I couldn't stop. We lived for the first few weeks like two tides that never quite met. He left before light for the boatyard and came home smelling of cedar and varnish and salt. I worked the wheel in the mornings and loaded the kiln in the afternoons. We were both people who could live in a house with another person without filling the silence, which sounds lonely, but was actually the first restful thing I'd felt in 2 years. He never asked me how I was. I cannot tell you how much I respected him for that. Everyone else asked me how I was with a particular tilt of the head, and I had to spend energy I didn't have arranging my face into an answer that would let them off the hook. Theo just nodded at me in the kitchen and asked once whether the gulls woke me up too. That was the whole conversation, and it was perfect. There were small things looking back that I didn't understand at the time. The first week, he came home, and without being asked, he climbed up and checked the kiln flue, found the damper rusted half open the way I'd suspected and dreaded, and fixed it before winter could turn it into carbon monoxide leaking back into the house at night. He didn't make a thing of it. He just said, "It's safe now," and went up to his room. I stood in the yard for a long time after that. I had not, I realised, particularly wanted the house to be safe. And a stranger had made it safe anyway, on his second day, without knowing what he was undoing. He noticed which mug I reached for in the mornings, the dark one with the thumb dent in the side that I'd thrown the week Sam died, and kept because it was ugly and honest, and he started leaving it rinsed and set by the kettle. He never mentioned it. I never mentioned it. It became the first thing my day was built around without my ever deciding to build it there. It was the third week when he made the stew. I came in from a long firing, exhausted, glaze flecks up to my elbows, expecting to eat crackers over the sink the way I did most nights. And there was a pot on the stove, and 2 places set at the table I almost never used. Fish stew, the simple kind, nothing fancy. The kind a person makes when they learn to cook for someone else and never unlearn the habit of cooking for 2. He didn't say anything about why. He just nodded at the chair. It wasn't a suggestion. I sat. We ate without much talking, which by then was our native language. And then he set down his spoon and folded his hands and said the thing about the strange favour. "You can say no," he said again, like he needed me to have that escape route nailed down before he'd let himself continue. "And if you say no, nothing changes. I'll still fix the gutter. I'll still pay on the first." "Just ask me," I said. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the window where the harbour lights had started to come on across the water. Then he told me. His wife's name had been Cora. She died 2 years and 3 months ago, of a cancer that took 11 months to do what it came to do. She had asked him, near the end, to scatter her ashes off the water at a particular place, a small cove north of the harbour where they'd anchored on their first trip together, back when he was just a man with a leaky second-hand sailboat, and she was a woman who'd never been on the ocean and pretended not to be afraid. He'd promised her he would. And then he hadn't been able to. 2 years he'd carried that box from apartment to this house, the cardboard box on his bedroom floor. He couldn't take the boat out alone and do it, because the one time he'd tried, he'd gotten halfway to the cove and turned around and come back and sat in the dark of the marina until morning. He couldn't do the last part of letting her go by himself, and he had no one left to ask. Because grief, he said, has a way of clearing a room. After enough months, the people who'll sit with you in it are gone, and the people who are left only want you to be better already. I don't know why I'm asking you, he said. I barely know you, but you're the first person in 2 years who hasn't looked at me like I'm a problem to be solved. You just let me be quiet next to you. I thought, maybe that's the kind of person who could be on a boat with me while I do this. Someone who won't try to make it into something, who'll just let it be what it is. I want to tell you that I said yes out of kindness. That would be a cleaner story. The truth is messier, and I've made my peace with telling it. The truth is that I said yes because, sitting there with the steam between us, I understood that this man was asking me to help him do the gentlest possible version of the thing I had been planning to do to myself. Let go. Set something down on the water and let the tide carry it out and not chase it. And some animal part of me thought, if I can help him do it well, maybe I'll understand how to do mine. I was wrong about what I'd learn, but that's why I said yes. Okay, I said. When the water's flat, we'll need a flat morning. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the way you nod when someone has handed you back a weight you've been carrying so long you'd forgotten it wasn't part of your body. He picked his spoon back up. We finished the stew. Neither of us said anything else. It was, I think, the most that had ever been said in that kitchen. We got our flat morning 11 days later, on the kind of windless dawn where the harbour turns to hammered pewter, and the only sound is the slap of halyards against masts. He'd restored a small wooden launch at the yard, 22 feet, varnished gunnels, an engine that started on the first pull because he'd rebuilt it himself. He handled the boat the way I handle clay, listening to it, never forcing it. I sat in the bow with the box on my knees because he asked me to hold it, and I understood that the holding was part of the favour, that he needed someone else's hands on it for the last stretch, so that letting go would be a thing two people did, and not a thing he did alone. The cove was exactly as plain as these places always are. A curve of dark rock, some spruce leaning out over the water, a depth of green that goes to black. He cut the engine. The boat rocked. He didn't make a speech. He'd told me on the way out that Cora had hated speeches, had once walked out of her own retirement party because someone wouldn't stop toasting her. So he just opened the box, and he and I together, his hands and then mine, let her go into the water, and the ash made a pale cloud that hung for a second and then was gone, pulled apart by a current that didn't care, and was, in its not caring, a mercy. He stood there a long time. I didn't feel the silence. I'd learned that from him. And then he said, very quietly, not to me, okay. Twice, like he was confirming something, and he sat down and started the engine and took us home. I cried on the way back, not for Cora, who I never met, for Sam, whose ashes I had scattered alone off the breakwater 8 months after he died, with no one beside me, because I'd been so determined to prove I didn't need anyone that I'd robbed myself of the one thing that might have helped, a second pair of hands. I understood, on that boat, watching a near stranger do the thing right, that I'd done mine wrong. Not the scattering, the alone. Theo saw me crying and did the kindest thing anyone had done for me in 2 years. He looked away. He let me have it without an audience, the way I'd let him have his. By the time we reached the marina, neither of us mentioned it, and that was its own form of trust. Something changed after that, though we didn't name it and didn't rush it. We started eating together most nights. He'd cook, or I would. Simple food, nothing performed. He'd tell me about the boats, how a hole tells you where it's been by where it's worn, how you can read a previous owner's neglect or care in the grain. I'd tell him about clay, about how a pot remembers every hesitation in your hands, how you can't fix a wobble by pressing harder. We had 2 languages, and we were both slowly learning the other one. He never tried to hold my hand. We never said a single soft word. And yet, a thing was being built between two people who were both very good at building things alone, and I felt the house settle around it the way a hull settles when you finally get the ballast right. I want to be clear about how slow this was, because the slowness is the whole point. 3 months in, we had not so much as brushed shoulders on purpose. He kept his door shut. I kept mine. But I'd stopped giving my things away. I'd called the high school art teacher and told her I didn't need to talk to her about the kiln after all. I'd let the date in my head pass without noticing it pass, which is the only way out of a place like that. Not a grand decision, just a morning where you forget to want to stop, and then another, until the wanting has quietly moved out and you find you're paying rent on a future again. Then Marcus came back. They always do, the loud ones, right when the quiet has started to take. It was a Saturday afternoon in early spring. I was unloading a kiln in the yard, mugs still too hot to touch, when I heard a car door slam too hard on the gravel and that laugh I could have identified in my sleep. Marcus, in a good coat, with a clipboard, and behind him a man in an even better coat I'd never seen. I knew before he opened his mouth. He'd heard the studio was struggling. He sold commercial real estate. The man behind him was a developer. They wanted the property, the house, the studio, the half-acre that backed onto the water. And Marcus had decided that the kindest thing he could do, the thing that would let him feel like a hero, was to swoop in and buy me out of my sad little situation before the bank did it for less. "Ren," he said, with the head tilt, the one everyone used. "I heard you've been having a hard time. I want to help. We want to help." The "we" did a lot of work in that sentence. I didn't say anything. I'd learned from a quiet man with a boat that silence is not the same as weakness, and that the person who fills the air first is usually the person who's losing. Theo came around the side of the house then, sawdust on his forearms, having heard the gravel. He didn't insert himself between us. He just leaned against the doorframe of the studio, arms crossed, present, the way you set a stone against a door that wants to blow open in the wind. Marcus looked at him, did the math, and got it wrong the way men like Marcus always get it wrong. "Oh," he said with a little laugh. "Is this... what, the help? You renting rooms now too? Ren, come on. This place is underwater. You're going to fire pottery until the bank takes the kiln out from under you. I'm offering you a way out that doesn't end in bankruptcy. The studio thing was always more of a hobby than a..." "Don't," I said. "Just the one word." He stopped. "I'd like to tell you I had a speech. I didn't. What I had was the truth, and the truth is heavier than any speech. You left," I said, "because I went somewhere you couldn't follow. You were right about that. I did. But you never once asked me what was there. You just stood at the edge of it waiting for me to come back out so you could feel useful." This man. I didn't look at Theo. I kept my eyes on Marcus. Lived in my house for 3 months and never once made me perform being okay. He just made the house safe and left a mug by the kettle. You don't know what that's worth because you've never been in the dark long enough to need it. This is not a hobby. This is the one thing I made with my own hands that I didn't let break. You don't get to buy it. You don't get to flip it into something with a granite island and call it helping me. Get off my gravel. The developer was already backing toward the car. He'd read the room before Marcus did. Marcus stood there a second longer, and I watched something cross his face that I think was the closest he ever got to understanding what he'd walked away from. Then he gave that laugh, the one that used to fill a parking lot, and it sounded thin in my yard, like a bell rung underwater. He left. The car kicked up gravel going out the way it had coming in. I was shaking, not from fear, from the strange, clean exhaustion of having said a true thing out loud after years of silence. Theo crossed the yard then, the first time he'd ever closed distance toward me on purpose, and he stood beside me. Not in front, beside. And he looked out at the water and said, "That mug really is ugly." And I laughed, the real kind, the kind I hadn't done since before the breakwater, and I understood that he'd known about the mug the whole time and had been keeping the joke for the exact moment I'd need it. We held hands for the first time that evening on the back step, watching the marina lights come up across the water. Not movie romantic, just two grown people who'd both lost too much to rush anything, finally letting their hands say a thing their mouths weren't ready for. We didn't kiss. He went up to his room. I sat out a while longer, and for the first time in 2.5 years, I caught myself wondering, without dread, what the next year would look like. It was almost a full year after the boat, the following spring, the cove green and black again, that I finally told him. We were out on the launch, no ashes this time, just two people who'd started taking the boat out on flat mornings, because we liked the quiet of it together. And I told him about the date I'd had in my head, about the kiln I'd almost given away, about the aunt's cabin and the giving away, and the flat, unemotional plan to stop being someone with a future. I told him that he had not, in fact, just rented a room, that he had answered an ad I'd posted as the last bridge before I closed everything down, and that every mug rinsed by the kettle, and every safe flew, and every silence he hadn't filled, had quietly held a door open that I'd been about to walk through the wrong way. He didn't say, "I'm so sorry." He didn't reach for any of the things people say to make a silence smaller. He cut the engine and let the boat rock, and he looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "I came out here 2 years ago to set something down on the water, and I couldn't do it alone." He paused. "Turns out neither could you. We just found that out in the wrong order." I asked him why he'd really chosen me, out of 11 answers to an ad. He said, "Because you were the only one who didn't ask about the price first. You asked about the kiln's flue. You wanted to know what might be dangerous before you wanted to know what it cost." He almost smiled. "I trust people who check the chimney before the rent." I kissed him then, the real first time, slow, no hurry, the kind of kiss that belongs to two people who've each set someone down on the water and learned what it costs to let go and what it costs not to. When I pulled back, he kept his eyes closed for a breath, the way you do when you want to feel a thing without an audience. Then he opened them, and we sat in the rocking boat and didn't say anything. And the not saying was the fullest thing I'd ever shared with another person. We're not married. We don't even fully live as most people would call it. He kept his room for a while, and then the room became a studio for the small repairs he brings home, and the line between his side of the house and mine has gone soft the way a property line goes soft when nobody needs to defend it anymore. I still throw pots. The kiln still costs too much. The bank stopped sending the envelopes once the boatyard started turning a profit, and Theo never once made the saving of the studio into a thing I owed him for. The ugly mug with the thumb dent is still the one I reach for. He still rinses it. I used to think strength was the absence of needing anyone. I built a whole quiet life on that idea, and the life was real, and the quiet was real. But it was the quiet of a held breath, not the quiet of rest. There's a difference, and most people don't learn it until someone sits next to them in the dark long enough to teach it. A near stranger with a cardboard box he couldn't unpack taught it to me. And the strangest part is he wasn't trying to. He just needed a second pair of hands on the water, and I needed to learn what those hands were for. So before you scroll on tonight, I want to leave you with 2 questions, and I read every answer, so don't be shy. First, is there something you've been carrying that you can't set down because you're trying to do it alone? A grief, a box, a plan you haven't told anyone about. And has it ever occurred to you that the reason you can't put it down isn't that you're weak, but that some things were only ever meant to be set down by 2 pairs of hands? And second, the harder one. If a quiet person moved into the edge of your life right now, no fireworks, no rescue, just someone who rinsed your ugly mug and never asked you to perform being okay, would you recognise what they were offering? Or would you mistake the quiet for nothing and let them go? Because I almost did. The whole thing turned on a flat morning and a strange favour, and a man who looked away while I cried so I could have it to myself. If this story reached you somewhere real tonight, hit the like button so it finds the next person sitting in a too quiet house. Subscribe if you want more stories about the slow kind of saving, the kind that doesn't shout. And in the comments, tell me, are you the one carrying the box you can't unpack? Or are you the one who could be a second pair of hands for someone if you were brave enough to offer? There's no wrong answer. I read all of them.